President Cyril Ramaphosa says government is ramping up efforts to deal with the ongoing violence affecting Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. He met with opposition parties to discuss a way forward. The president says the destruction of malls, warehouses and properties will hurt South Africans, especially the poor and the elderly. He also raised concerns about a food shortage, fuel and medicine supply. Opposition parties have meanwhile called for greater coordination between the police, intelligence, the SANDF and private security and community-based groups. Political leaders also called on the president to consider deploying more SANDF members to areas affected by this unrest. While the ongoing acts of looting have had a serious impact on the most vulnerable members of society, women, young people and those with disabilities will be hardest hit as they're forced to travel further distances to buy basic goods, and certainly the increasing rate of unemployment in the wake of the businesses that have been affected. Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Dr. Hlengiwe Mkhize, joins me now. Professor Mkhize, that is. Professor Mkhize, good evening to you, and thanks for your time tonight. Firstly, your reflections on this moment that we are in as South Africa.
Good evening, Kathy. Good evening to the listeners. Well, as your opening remarks clearly indicate, I must say, this has been an emotionally draining week, because when you hear of a number of deaths, you start saying, did these people have to die? If you look at destruction, what goes on in your mind is, why destroy our infrastructure? So there are too many questions, but no answers. Sometimes you hear the clinic has been destroyed, the vaccine center is inaccessible. Women have been sending us messages that if, in terms of women and maternal health, if you want to access the hospital, maybe you are giving birth, it's impossible to move around because the roads are blocked. So it has been a very heavy week, given the harm on the economy and other social aspects. As of today, more responses we're getting as monitoring what's going on in the country as a whole is people when they say, there's no bread. I've been to 2 or 3 shops, I couldn't find bread. So, our heart goes out to families who have lost people who got attracted to this crime we're talking about, but also we really feel sorry for those families that have that kind of an aftermath. It's painful to us, it's even worse to them to know that their people are born, but they didn't have to die.
Professor Mkhize, some of the questions that you are asking are questions that many South Africans could well be grappling with. Of course, the biggest difference is that many South Africans are not ministers. They don't form part of cabinet. Therefore, they're not privy to the kind of accountability that an individual like yourself, being a deputy minister, would be. So you have the opportunity of asking your colleagues directly about this situation. You ask, did these people have to die in the way that they have? And have you asked this of your colleagues? Have you tried to get answers for why this situation has been allowed to disintegrate into what it is right now?
That's an honest and frank question that you are asking. And you will be surprised that we've been engaging on this issue from the time when it started. But I must say, what we have seen, the levels of economic sabotage and destruction, we really least expected. I'm talking for myself, where I'm sitting, talking to people, women, young people, and some organizations when you say what's going on in your community, what do you think we should do? Yes, there were people who were saying these people are not going to stop, but really nobody comprehended the extent of what we've seen in terms of arson, literally targeting all centers that were in the infrastructure that was put up to really deal with bread and butter issues, access to the economy, being able to go to work with ease, even if you come out late, knowing that you are nearby. So the bigger question for us now, for our vulnerable groups, is in terms of the aftermath. Where do they start? What do they do? They still have to get jobs. They still have to feed families. Their children have to go back to school. But here they are. They are in a position where they are not the masterminds of what we are dealing with. Some got attracted when they hear that there you can get bread, there you can get pieces of chicken. But I don't think they sat under the roof where they were planning and strategizing, because the majority of them, when you talk to them, you could see if they were to reverse anything, this is one thing they shouldn't have been involved themselves in. So here we are in a difficult situation, but do you know there's a hope in South Africa, because I think some people have gone back to how we stopped violence in the past by reviving community structures. You know, for me, my plea is that we just all have to remember that any form of violence begets violence. So it's in the interest of all of us to make sure that as we intervene, as we stop the chaos, we who are stopping the chaos shouldn't engage in violence, because violence begets violence.
Professor Mkhize, I'm going to go back to the question that I had asked you. And it's an important question. I hear you about being able to pick up the pieces and move on, but we're not there yet. The looting is still continuing. This situation was allowed to happen for a number of days, and in some areas continues to happen. And you, as the Deputy Minister, said you are asking questions. Questions many South Africans are asking themselves as well. What are the answers that you are getting from your officials? You are speaking about a constituency, women, young people, people with disabilities, that you are representing in cabinet. So when you have to go back to report to that constituency, what are the answers that you are going to give them about why the situation was allowed to get to where it is right now?
You see, Kathy, maybe it's a question of language. You know, the public out there, they talk about what was allowed. And I'm saying nobody turned a blind eye. What I know and how I understand developments, nobody really estimated what we're dealing with today. But since the security cluster has been mandated to do everything possible to deal with the situation within the context of our constitution, within the context of our democracy and the culture of human rights, avoiding the previous experiences where they went blindly on a just cause and more lives were lost. I think as of today is different from what we saw on Monday. So we just have to really support them, encourage them. I mean, you know, our constituency, Kathy, are vulnerable. When you talk to persons with disability, some they tell us that I used to send a child to take a trolley from the supermarket, put me inside, and then I'll go and buy. They bring me back, they go back. Now, how am I going to get to a faraway mall? So these access issues to food security, just to basics, survival needs, they're big for this constituency.
Professor Mkhize, government on one hand seems to be the constituency here that has been caught off guard. And yet when we speak to different individuals, we speak to think tanks that have been working with the question of what lies ahead for South Africa, given the deep poverty, the deep inequality that we're facing. This is a scenario that has been projected. It's a scenario that has been forecast by multiple agencies. And what's interesting about it is that women and young people are often at the top of the list when it comes to vulnerability. So one would have anticipated that somebody in your position, yes, maybe not expecting that it could well be the moment that this happens, but that you would have been anticipating the kind of social unrest that we're seeing right now, because that's part of what the record shows we have been heading up to.
Well, thank you very much for that. As I've said, I appreciate an honest, open, frank discussion. You know, we've been focusing on rebuilding differently. I fully agree with you. Economists have been raising an eyebrow in terms of this, saying the situation we're in is not normal. You can't have so many people excluded in the economy. But the interventions that were introduced in the making of COVID, but as a way of rebuilding differently, we're really addressing all the issues you are raising. For instance, I come from the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability. Sometimes I end up not saying a thing about women, youth and persons with disability, because so many cabinet colleagues, they will jump in, they will raise these issues, how poverty affects the most vulnerable. So there has been this heightened level of consciousness. But what has happened, I really still believe, when you look at revolutions all over the world, that's why I said we are where we are today, and I really believe we have to go back to our community structures so that we all are able to engage and assess whether economic sabotage is a sustainable solution compared to what we have been pushing for, to say COVID was a disaster, but what's an opportunity here to rebuild the economy differently and make sure it's inclusive. So we appreciate that our people's patience might have been running out, but we do believe in their commitment that when we go back to structures, to them, as you saw almost yesterday and today, almost all politicians were out. Even those who were not followed by the media, they were going to different high-risk communities. So I do believe, as we talk to people, showing them that we should look for alternatives to violence. We should limit the risks that goes with violence. I think we find that many people, they keep on saying, there's nothing I can do, I cannot reverse the clock. I agreed when people were saying, let's go and loot, but looting, I might have sugar. My neighbor has nothing. On the other street, they have nothing. So people are realizing the challenge of economic sabotage. They tell you more than what I can tell at short notice now.
Professor Mkhize, the visits come after the fact, and I've just been listening to the number of times that you've been using, it's time to go back to the communities, it's time to go back to the community infrastructure and, you know, be able to talk to people. Isn't that part of why we are in this situation today? And part of the critique for government has been that government is out of touch with communities in this country. That even after the president speaks, the violence, the looting can continue unabated, nothing changes, nothing moves, nothing shifts. And reflect on that for me. Again, as somebody who represents the most vulnerable groups in this country, and is there a sense from you that people have been let down, and they've been let down for too long, and this is the rediscovery of their own agency when it comes to wanting to have their voices heard?
Yeah, Kathy, I don't think there has been a complete absence of government's voice. I know very well that there is not even a single policy that goes through cabinet without a relevant minister showing everybody that I've consulted with these stakeholders and these are the views, they must be accommodated. But I think what was missing in this instance is that sometimes, you know, communities are complex. They are not one thing. So as you consult, you might talk to people who will somehow agree and understand. But given the fact that there are different players, different views and perspectives, so any call for sabotage, for destruction, creation of a psychological mob is likely to attract some segments of society. So I fully agree with you that when the president made a clarion call, our people should have listened and looked at all the commitments he have made at different levels. But I said earlier, you know, we must really understand that if you're an ordinary person who relies on a message, go there, your family will be fed. You go blindly. As we've seen some young women raising their hands, facing guns. And I was saying, if this person could be asked to account, they won't be able to tell you how they got there. So vulnerable group everywhere in any revolution, they are an easy target because they are hungry, they are desperate, and they are looking for, you know, almost like saying, I will look up the mountains where my help will come from.
All right.
Sometimes they don't care where it comes from, Professor, as long as they think I will get help.
We're going to have to leave it there for tonight. Unfortunately, we've completely run out of time for this conversation. Professor Klingiwe Mkhize, she's the Deputy Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disability.